True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
Stacey Castor was a recent widow suspected of 2 murders when her eldest daughter Ashley was hospitalized following an apparent suicide attempt. While some looked at Stacy with sympathy, others thought she was evil, a woman who was alone responsible for the tragedies in her own life. The story of Stacey Castor's life, her relationships, and her losses is a complex and very twisted narrative. After it all played out, she would be exposed as heartless and calculating. Join us at the quiet end today for Her Dark Plans, Stacey Castor. After getting away with 1 murder, Stacy became comfortable with eliminating anyone who got in the way of what she wanted. Her murderous plots knew no boundaries, not even the lives of the children she claimed to love.
So we're in New York for this crime, correct?
New York State, yep.
So I have a New York beer. I actually have a beer brewed by a brewery in Stacy's hometown, Weedsport.
Nice.
So the beer is Pumptoberfest. It's brewed by Lunkenheimer Craft Brewing Company in Weedsport. This is an Oktoberfest. So you might be wondering why I'm drinking an Oktoberfest in February.
Well, no, they're always good. That's what I was thinking.
It was there.
Yeah.
So this one is okay. It's nice that it's not terribly spicy, although Oktoberfest beers shouldn't be real spicy anyway. And this one shows a lot of pumpkin. So It's a rusty amber color, nice big white head, pumpkin aroma, some sweet malt. Taste goes right along those lines, pumpkin, little caramel. It's a light-bodied beer, very smooth, very drinkable. So I'd give it a pretty good score.
So from my limited experience, pumpkin beers aren't always very pumpkin-y. They're more like a pumpkin spice. But does this have a real pumpkin taste?
Yes, well, it's a subtle pumpkin taste, but it is there.
All right, well, let's give this one a try. Let's open it up.
We can open it up and take it on down.
Okay, let's take this on down to the quiet end. What's going on at the quiet end today?
Today is a celebration of almost daylight savings time.
Okay, I enjoy daylight savings time. What's your opinion on it?
Oh, I'm neutral. I don't care one way or the other.
Okay.
The thing with moving from standard time to daylight time is we lose an hour. We spring ahead. But at my age, it doesn't matter.
Okay. So you think there's an age when that does matter? And when would the cutoff be on that?
I think when you're 37 and a half.
Then you don't care anymore.
Right.
Okay. Something to look forward to for some of the younger folks.
Exactly.
All right, Dickie, why don't you start our story? I am enjoying this beer, by the way. I like it.
Well, I thought you would. It's a nice beer.
Yes.
Okay, let's talk about Stacey Castor, who was born Stacy Daniels. And she was born in Weedsport, which is a little town just 20 miles from Syracuse. Her dad was a car salesman. Stacy had a sister and a brother named Darcy and Jamie. All 3 of these kids went to school in the Weedsport public school system. Her sister became a nurse. Her and her brother worked for a large toy company. Now, Stacy had plans to become a lawyer or maybe a paralegal. But in her senior year in high school, she met and fell in love with a 24-year-old guy.
Yeah, and that kind of derailed all of her plans.
It did. So this guy is Mike Wallace. This was a good-looking guy. He was the life of every party, and he was the first guy who wasn't turned off by Stacy's height of 6 feet.
Well, in her mind, yeah.
In her own mind.
In her own mind, she felt like that was really not liked by the guys, that she was that tall.
Yeah, now this was a little bit of a strange situation anyway, and not just because of the 6, 7, 8-year age difference. Mike had been married before. He'd been married to Stacy's third cousin, Nancy. Now, I had to look up what a third cousin meant, and that is people who are related at the level of their great-great-grandparents. So that's barely related. But anyway.
That's distant, but she did know her.
Yeah, well, I mean, if they all live in the same area, sure, she'd be acquainted with them.
Absolutely.
Now, back in time a little bit, Nancy, who was Mike's first wife, she had become pregnant with another guy's child in 1979. It was back when she and Mike were just 17. So Mike and Nancy got married, and they raised 2 children together. One was his stepdaughter, Renee, and they had a biological son, James.
But Nancy and Mike's marriage was just a disaster. You know, you could have kind of predicted that.
Well, geez. No kidding.
Well, they fought a lot, and Mike was in and out of jail for his partying ways. He had DUIs, and he even had domestic violence charges. So even though Mike had been abusive to her, Nancy always defended him. And she would claim that he had a big heart, but he was just raised in a family with some generational domestic violence. So basically saying he was a product of his environment.
Well, a lot of times that's the case. Not always, right?
Right. Hopefully people can break away from that, but I think it usually does take some self-awareness and some therapy.
Right. And it seems to me to be kind of an easy way out of things. You can say, well, I'll blame it on my parents or my upbringing.
Well, it can be a cop-out, yeah, for sure. So after 6 years together, Nancy and Mike did get divorced. No big surprise there. But it was just in time for Mike to fall in love with another high school senior, and that was Stacy.
He likes those high school seniors, doesn't he?
Yeah, and it didn't matter if he was a high school senior anymore. He still liked them.
Right.
So when Stacy and Mike got together, he was working as a setup operator at McQuay International. Pretty good job. This company manufactured heating, cooling, and building management equipment right in nearby Auburn. So within minutes of meeting Mike, Stacy was already planning a life with him. She wanted a wedding, a honeymoon, and then a family with him, and she thought they would spend the rest of their lives together. But then Stacy found out that she was pregnant just months after first having sex with Mike, and Mike decided he wasn't interested in having another child. So he broke up with Stacy. Now, of course, that didn't stop her from having his child, but she lived at home with her parents, and she gave birth to her daughter, Ashley. According to friends and family, Stacy was a good mom, in the beginning at least. She was madly in love with her baby. She was inseparable with Ashley and gave her all of her attention. And as Ashley grows up, we're going to see that Ashley and her mother were really best friends.
To me, that's not the way to raise a child.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Well, is there a way to be friends and still be the parent?
Oh,
it's
I think
a fine
so.
line.
I think there definitely is.
Yeah, but if you stop being the parent and you're only a friend, that's bad. I agree.
Right, or if you're the best friend.
True. It's really not healthy for the child. The child needs to go out and make their own friends with their peers.
Right, got it.
But anyway, Stacy found out, as many women do, that the bad boy party personality that had attracted her to her baby's father was really a negative when it came to settling down and raising a family together, because Mike liked to drink and go out with his friends. But she was really into him, and she didn't give up. She kept seeing Mike, showering him with love and attention, and eventually Mike did propose and gave Stacy an engagement ring, and she was so happy.
Yeah, if you look at the photos from Stacy and Mike's wedding, Mike looks pretty happy, pretty carefree. He had that thick, dirty blonde hair, kind of longish, big, huge, substantial mullet. Yeah,
that was one of those straight hair mullets that hangs down to like the shoulder blades.
Yeah.
So it was serious mullet.
Those are good.
Mm-hmm.
And Stacy was thrilled about how the wedding went and how everyone looked. The wedding took place in her family home, and there were lots of friends there to see her in her beautiful wedding dress.
Yeah, so looks like everything's happily ever after to Stacy at this point.
At this point. Well, and even with his ex-wife, Nancy, they all got along.
Yeah, they did. They even invited Nancy and her 2 kids over for Christmas one year. And Nancy was welcome to drop off her kids with Stacy and Mike for visits in their home. Mike had been in charge and quite abusive in his relationship with Nancy, but she noticed that he was very different with Stacy. Stacy was the one in charge in her house, wearing the pants, as they say, and Mike really towed the line. Stacy was a sharp young woman, really pretty smart, and she knew what she wanted to get done, and she did it. Still, Mike liked to go out drinking, and he even did some drugs, but it seemed like he was really good to Stacy when he was home. And he worked, so he provided.
Okay. I don't know. I think there's still some difficulties if he really likes to go out and drink and do drugs.
Well, yeah, that's
no matter
never
how
good.
good he is to his wife when he's home.
Right, sure. Yeah, but there's no doubt in anyone's mind back then that Stacy was really in love with Mike.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, to her, he was like a teen idol, and she had a big crush on him even after they'd been married for years. Also, everyone agreed that Mike adored Stacy, so even though things weren't perfect, it seemed to be working for a while.
It did. Now, 3 years after Ashley was born, they had a second daughter, named her Bree. Now, Mike called Bree his little princess, and it was obvious that he preferred Bree over Ashley. Now, this was kind of strange, because he apparently fathered both children, right?
Yeah, apparently.
But some people started to question if, maybe Mike doesn't think he's Ashley's father. Because we know that one of the two children that he had with Nancy, one had been conceived with another man. So maybe he remembered that and showed some coldness towards Ashley.
Yeah, maybe it was not even a conscious thing.
Right.
But later on, Stacy would say that Mike's preference for Bree was very hurtful to Ashley, that there was an obvious lack of emotion between Mike and his oldest daughter. So obvious that she even pointed it out in family photos. Stacy said that she tried to compensate for the lack of fatherly love by spending as much time with Ashley as possible. So their relationship really went beyond that of a mother and a daughter, and they were more like best friends. But, Ashley didn't remember it that way. She didn't remember feeling rejected by her dad or seeing him prefer her sister. She had happy memories of her dad from when she and Bree were little girls. So when we think about this, when we go into talking about her crimes, we might realize that Stacy was kind of playing this up for her own reasons.
Yes.
Sure.
So when Stacy and Mike got married, she worked as an ambulance dispatcher, and Mike was a mechanic. They managed, but they didn't have an excessive amount of money. They didn't do vacations or other big indulgences. They lived in a 2-story house near the junior high and high schools in a nice working-class neighborhood. In 1995, Mike's stepdaughter, Renee, moved in with them. Now, Renee was pretty rebellious at this point, and she was getting into trouble. Nancy thought Mike might be able to straighten her out, but that didn't happen. Renee continued to have problems, and it became apparent that this living situation wasn't going to work out. Stacy insisted that Renee go back to her mother's house. In her mind, she was a bad influence on the other kids, Ashley and Bree.
Yeah, so she was definitely giving preference to her own biological daughters.
Yeah, definitely.
But Renee really remembered her time with the Wallace family quite fondly. She had been growing up in trailers with her mom, and the Wallace house, even though it wasn't great, was okay. After Stacy sent her away, she felt hurt and rejected, and there was no further contact. In fact, she never saw Mike again, and she didn't see Stacy, Ashley, and Bree until Mike's funeral.
Now, by the time Ashley was a preteen, the marriage was on the rocks. Both Mike and Stacy had been unfaithful to each other. They fought frequently. Stacy told a friend she's considering a divorce, but she didn't go through with it. Now, leading up to Christmas in 1999, Stacy told one friend that she would be asking Mike for a divorce after the holidays. However, in late 1999, Mike became ill. He went through weeks of failing health. He'd feel better one day, and the next day he wouldn't even be able to get out of bed.
Yeah, so Mike did go to the doctor, complaining of feeling dizzy and drunk, even when he was sober. He had complaints of poor balance and intermittent weakness. And he was tested for diabetes, high blood pressure, inner ear issues, and some other things, but all of those tests were normal. So he still didn't get better, though, and he got to the point sometimes he could barely get out of bed. Some extended family visited for the holidays and were really shocked to see Mike in such bad shape. So they convinced him to make plans to see a doctor in early 2000, but he never made it that long. In early January, 11-year-old Ashley noticed that her dad was acting strangely. He had been ill, and he was lying on the sofa, and he seemed to be making weird faces at her, but he wasn't speaking. So as she left the house to go get her sister at school, She noticed that Mike lifted one of his arms and held it at his side before letting it drop. And when Ashley got home with Bree, they noticed an ambulance in their driveway. And Stacy came out front and told the girls to go next door to the neighbor's house. Later on, their grandmother came to the neighbor's house and informed the girls that their father had died.
And now this really shocked Ashley and frightened her, because she blamed herself for her father's death. She remembered how he had been acting on the couch earlier that day, and she thought maybe she would have saved him if she had done something. On the other hand, he wasn't in real distress, and she had to pick up her sister.
Well, and she was 11. She didn't know.
Yeah.
But doctors believed anyway that Mike had died of a heart attack. He was a drinker and a smoker, and he had had some complaints of pain in his shoulder. So the thought was that his heart must have failed him. Mike's sister Rosemary was kind of suspicious because his skin was a weird dark purple color. But she didn't think of murder. She just thought maybe there was something other than a heart attack that was responsible for his death. But she didn't know, so she did suggest to Stacy that maybe an autopsy would be a good idea. But Stacy said no. Mike's mom didn't want it done either, so Rosemary just kind of let that topic go. If the doctors believed it was a heart attack, who was she to question them? It's not like Mike had a healthy lifestyle.
No, it's quite plausible, although he'd still be pretty young, right?
Yeah, I think he was 38.
Yeah, so it's a little young.
Sure, but it happens.
Oh, it does happen. Again, if he was a smoker and a drinker, it's not unheard of.
Nope. Plus, he hadn't been well.
He hadn't been well. Now, Mike wouldn't be buried until the spring, because they had to wait for the ground to thaw. And they did have a service at the local funeral home. Friends and family who attended noticed that Stacy seemed very stoic. No one saw her cry at the funeral or at the hospital where she was informed of his death. Now, Stacy said that she had to stay calm and strong for the sake of her daughters.
Yeah, so a lot of people admired that strength. They saw her as a strong and capable woman, just, holding it all together for her children. Mike left a $50,000 life insurance policy, and Stacy used the money to pay for the funeral, to pay off some debts, and then she took the girls on a vacation to Disney World. Which, I don't know, it's a little weird, but I can kind of see it being an okay thing to do.
Well, I think that's a great idea, actually.
It's not necessarily celebrating, it's just getting away from things.
Right. And the kids are, 8 and 11 or something like that?
Yeah.
Oh, go on a little trip and just kick back. So that's what they did.
Sure. And Stacy seemed to adapt quickly to her life as a single mom. The mourning period was quite short, and Stacy set an example for her daughters to be optimistic and upbeat about life. So for the next 3 years, the girls felt like they had a happy life with their mom. But when Stacy started dating David Castor, they weren't thrilled. David owned an air conditioning installation and repair company, and Stacy was his office manager there. He was a little bit like Mike. He was a fun-loving, large guy, just her type. He was about 10 years older than Stacy, and they ended up getting married in August of 2003. And in the photos, you can see that Bree was smiling at the camera, but Ashley seemed kind of unimpressed by the whole thing.
She seemed actually kind of pissed off in that picture.
Yeah, I don't think she was happy about it.
So Stacy moved herself and the 2 girls into David's house in the town of Clay. Didn't take long for difficulties to arise between Stacy and David, and between David and Stacy's girls. David was very strict with the girls, and Ashley rebelled against this. Then Stacy and David started fighting, and Stacy became involved with a new man, and she began to have regrets for marrying David.
Right.
So this sort of went downhill fairly quickly, didn't it?
Pretty quickly, yeah.
Now, Monday, August 22nd, 2005, at around 2 p.m., Stacey Castor called 911. She told the operator she was worried about her husband. According to Stacy, David had locked himself in their bedroom for the past day. Now, he wasn't answering his phone, and he hadn't showed up for work.
So Stacy called 911 from her job, not from their home. She told the operator that she was very concerned about how David had been acting. According to Stacy, she and David had been arguing on the previous Friday night, and David had told her and her daughters to leave. But then, she said in the next breath, he had threatened that he would make her sorry if she ever left him. So the 911 operator transferred Stacy's call to Sergeant Willoughby at the sheriff's office. And Stacy told Willoughby that she couldn't understand why her husband would behave this way. She said that she'd checked the house and she'd called him repeatedly since the night before, but she hadn't been getting any answer. But it immediately occurred to him that it was odd she was calling from her office and not the house. But she said she had her key, and she told the sergeant she would meet him at the house to do like a welfare check. And when Willoughby pulled into the driveway of the Castor home, Stacy was there. But it was a little weird. He saw her sitting in a lawn chair beneath a tree in the front yard, and she appeared just very calm, smoking a cigarette and just kind of waiting for him to show up. She didn't seem restless or particularly concerned about her husband, who she said was probably suicidal, and she definitely didn't look like someone who had just called 911 for help with an emergency. So Willoughby identified himself to Stacy and asked her to unlock the front door for him. So he entered and walked directly to the master bedroom, while Stacy stayed behind on the porch. So that was kind of weird. Willoughby pounded on the bedroom door and identified himself, but there was no response. He jiggled the knob, and the door was locked. So at this point, he's not sure what's going on. He doesn't want to just break down the door for no real reason. So he got a ladder and tried to look through the bedroom window. But the blinds were drawn, so he decided he was just going to have to break down the door. So he went back into the house, but Stacy didn't follow him. She went into the garage. And after he kicked in the bedroom door, the room was just silent. David Castor was in there, and he was very dead. His body was naked, laying sideways on the bed, with his feet over the edge of the bare mattress. There was vomit pooled under his head, and he had vomit on his hands, dried and caked beneath his fingernails and in the creases of his skin.
And his fingers were stiff and sort of in a claw position. So that sounds like rigor mortis. Willoughby checked him for vital signs and found none. No surprise. The bedroom and the adjoining bathroom were littered with clothing and sheets that were spotted with dried vomit. Now there were 2 glasses and a bottle of apricot-flavored brandy on a nightstand. Next to the bed, there was a bottle of Peak antifreeze. One of the 2 glasses was filled with a bright, almost like a fluorescent green liquid. And as Willoughby took in this bizarre scene, Stacy still was not in the house. He went outside and called to her, and she entered the house with a fair amount of hesitation. And then in a soft voice she asked Willoughby, "Is David okay?"
Well, when Stacy walked into the doorway of her bedroom, she saw her husband's body, and she screamed and began yelling, "Bring him back, bring him back, he's not dead." So Stacy went into some kind of hysterics, and Willoughby called in the medical examiner, the homicide investigators, and the forensics team. After all this backup arrived, he searched the Castor home, and Stacy was continuing to sob. Her friend Lynn showed up to comfort her, and she was talking to her. But investigators determined that David hadn't been dead for longer than a few hours. He did have mucus on his mouth and nose, which is a common sign of death by poisoning. The initial conclusion was that David had died of self-administered poisoning. So the glass of green liquid smelled very chemical-like. So that was probably the antifreeze. There was a blue antifreeze bottle that was so obvious. It was placed beneath David's feet, and it really looked like it had been purposely placed there. It was surrounded by vomit, but there was no vomit on it, so it looked like someone had set it there after he threw up, which would have been odd.
Well, it would have been odd for him to do it, right?
Right. So in the bathroom, part of a towel rack had been torn out of the wall, and it was lying near the toilet. And also there was a shotgun found under his bed. It was loaded.
So Stacy was questioned about her whereabouts and other activities on Sunday. She said she had spent a lot of time at the Walmart doing some shopping. She had a receipt, but then she thought that she'd probably thrown it away. So while the kitchen was being searched, investigators found a white trash basket lined with a white trash bag. Willoughby began searching it for a receipt. Beneath a few papers, there was a turkey baster. Now, it had been thrown away. It was in the trash, but it looked new. And then so the question is, had someone put it in the trash to hide it? Then looking a little more closely at it, the baster is found to have droplets of green liquid in it. and it had a strong chemical smell.
Aha. Well, back in the bedroom, every glass and bottle were bagged and labeled for forensics, and pictures were taken. One photo of note showed where vomit had run off the mattress and pooled onto the rug, and the antifreeze bottle sat on top of that puddle without one drop of the vomit on the container. Later, when Stacy and her daughters were brought to the police station for questioning, Stacy gave a very detailed account of her activities over the past few days. A little too detailed, they felt. She gave a list of what she had eaten, who she had called, and anyone who had seen her out and about. And she also revealed that she had a boyfriend.
So the investigators are thinking maybe this isn't as it appears.
Right, exactly.
The alibi is so detailed, it's like it was scripted to make sure she had the alibi.
Exactly.
So.
And, let's just say this is a very unusual and horrible way to kill yourself.
If that, in fact, is what happened, right?
Right, exactly.
Plus, she told the cops that she had a boyfriend, so that's not going to help her case.
No, not at all. It was funny when I was reading about this. The detective who was talking to her said that he had asked her, were there any troubles in the marriage? And she said, well, no, not really. I do have a boyfriend, if you mean anything with that. So kind of trying to downplay that, I guess.
Well, yeah, but it could be that they had a nice open marriage.
No. No.
I was just scratching around.
Sure. Well, Stacy did say that David had been acting strangely for over a month, and she said he had frequently told her that he didn't have long to live. He had told her that his blood pressure was very, very high, and any day he could just drop dead. Stacy said that David was a melancholy type of person. It's very different from how most people would describe him. She also said he'd gotten worse after his father's recent death about a month ago. But he had told her he wasn't afraid of death. He was more worried about becoming incapacitated and a burden to his family. So to me, this is just a very strange tangent to go on.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So and she said that over the past week or so, she and David had been arguing a lot. They had just had their second wedding anniversary, but the marriage was not revived by efforts at romance.
Yeah, David said he wanted a second honeymoon, apparently, and he wanted to spend 2 weeks away, just the two of them. But Stacy said that she told him no, that the girls couldn't be left alone for so long. Bree was only 15, actually. So she suggested that they go away with the girls. But that's not what he wanted, so that set off a really explosive argument.
Well, he apparently didn't particularly like his stepdaughters.
Yeah, but wouldn't you think she could find someone to stay with the girls if she really wanted to go spend time with him?
Well, of course she could. And the other thing, if Bree was 15, that means that Ashley was 18.
Right.
They're old enough to leave by themselves.
Well, yeah, I guess. I mean, that's iffy. I guess it depends how much you can trust them.
Well, sure.
It's not always the wisest thing to leave two teenagers home alone.
I know.
But she had a mother nearby that could have checked in on them.
Yeah.
And friends and things.
I think they could have done it.
Something could have been arranged, I think.
Yeah.
But, Stacy did say that David had never wanted to be a stepfather to her daughters. In fact, he would become jealous of the attention that she gave to them. So the couple had argued in the garage so the girls wouldn't hear them. Then David had stomped off and locked himself in their bedroom, she said. So she had slept on the couch. Then later that Friday night, Stacy said that they had resumed their argument. And this argument lasted off and on for nearly 7 hours.
A marathon. Holy cow.
I know. It had occurred to her at one point that maybe David was planning to hurt himself, she said. She said he'd been drinking Pepsi, but when she asked him for a sip, he pulled the drink away and told her to go get her own. So at the time, she thought maybe he was just being difficult, but after he died, she said looking back, maybe he had put something into his drink and he was already poisoning himself. That's really a stretch for me.
Yeah, but again, she wants this scenario to look a certain way.
Yeah, but she's a little obvious about it.
Well, yeah, but she didn't want to be subtle.
No, I guess not. No risk of that.
Now, Stacy said that their argument had become emotionally abusive, not physically abusive, but Stacy had begun to fear that he could. She said that she became frightened of her husband. Now, after this fight, he had just started binge drinking and vomiting for the entire weekend. Now, still, Stacy said she tried to be a good wife and take care of him. She changed his sheets after he threw up on them. She also helped clean him up, and she brought him cranberry juice and water to keep him hydrated. What a wonderful wife. Then all day Saturday, she attended to him and asked him if she could call an ambulance or take him to the emergency room. But allegedly, he refused.
So that's not the kind of thing you ask. You just go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
Right? If he's in that bad a shape, you don't just keep cleaning up vomit and leaving him there. And another thing about Stacy was how calm she was as she told this story at the police department. She conceded that it would be odd for a man to choose to drink antifreeze to take his own life, but she thought that it was possible in David's case. And she explained this in a weird way. She said she remembered that she and David had watched a 48 Hours episode about a year back about a woman who had killed 2 of her husbands by serving them antifreeze in green jello. And she said that the show was on again about a month or 2 ago, and they had watched it a second time. So maybe that's where David had gotten the idea, she said.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very weird. So let's take a minute here for a break for our sponsors. So that previous antifreeze poisoning case that Stacy said she saw on TV was the case of Lynn Turner. Lynn was a former emergency operator from Atlanta, Georgia, and she killed her husband Maurice Turner in 1995 by putting antifreeze in his green jello. Now he was a police officer. Then 6 years later in 2001, she killed her firefighter boyfriend Randy Thompson the same way. And it was believed that both men had died of natural causes until investigators took note of this coincidence in how the men had died, and they did some testing and found ethylene glycol poisoning. Now, the Lynn Turner case obviously got a lot of media attention, including national media attention. But you know what? 48 Hours never actually did an episode about this case. So this was made up by Stacy for some unknown reason. I mean, she must have heard about it somewhere, but it wasn't a 48 Hours episode.
Apparently not.
So I think here's a good time to just go over briefly what ethylene glycol is and how it does cause death.
Well, ethylene glycol is the main ingredient in antifreeze, right?
Yes.
And when you're using it in your car, not trying to feed it to anybody else, you dilute it. So you pour some in the radiator and pour some water, and that's all you got to do. Now, it's very sweet tasting. So there is a fairly good incidence of accidental poisoning, particularly in like dogs and cats that come across an open antifreeze container and it tastes good.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
So, but it's a poison. So what happens is it binds to certain cells in the body. It causes an acidosis, which means that your body is too acidic, and that can play havoc with a variety of organs. The major thing that ethylene glycol does is damage kidneys. So you have an acute renal failure situation, and unless things are recognized, that can be fatal. So it's not a good thing to have. There isn't that much that you have to ingest to cause death. You could get away with a small volume. Treatment, interestingly, is with alcohol. And the way it works, if I give alcohol, which is ethanol, it displaces the ethylene glycol from binding sites on the cells. And that allows the ethylene glycol to be excreted.
So it really wouldn't make sense if you're going to kill yourself with it to drink a lot of booze.
Well, it wouldn't, because you'd have to take a lot more ethylene glycol, right?
Right, and it might prolong things. And where does all the pain come in? They say it's a horrible, painful death.
Well, your body is, again, it's acidotic. That causes discomfort, and it causes a lot of muscle pain. So it's not a good way to die, and it's not a good way to kill yourself if that's your thought.
No, I mean, it does happen, though. People do that. It's not very often, but it's not unheard of.
No, it isn't. Now, after David's drinking binge had begun that Friday night, Stacy had been in and out of the house a few times. The first time she said she had found David naked on the floor next to his bed, and this was on a Saturday. She put underwear on him and tried to get him up to stand, but he couldn't stand. Then at 5 a.m. the next day, Sunday, she heard him vomiting and then saw him dry heaving and convulsing in the bedroom.
So isn't this the time that you might call 911?
Wouldn't you think?
Absolutely. Why wouldn't you? Makes no sense.
Well, Stacy said that when David saw her in the doorway, he yelled at her, "Get the fuck out of the house. Take your kids with you." And she said that was the last time she saw him alive, this Sunday morning.
But even if he said that, she could have called 911.
Well, she could have. I mean, look what she did when she finally did call. She called from work. So
I know, right?
It wasn't something that was keeping her from calling.
No, but if you can't stand, I mean, that's pretty serious.
Yes.
Yeah, so I don't really buy the whole thing.
So then Monday, after this long weekend of being worried about David, worried that he could hurt himself, worried that he could hurt her, Stacy went to work. Ho-hum, another day. But as the day moved on, she started to have a bad feeling. She got more and more nervous and afraid that David had actually hurt himself. This story is just full of holes.
Yeah, it's a terrible story, and a lot of it is very unbelievable. But she did really try and play things up. She said that David had been depressed and very stressed out. She brought up again how his father had died recently and how hard that had been on him. There were also some problems with his business. And for this reason, even though she wasn't worried about him over the weekend, she decided on Monday that he might have been suicidal.
Yeah, it's an epiphany.
So both Ashley and Bree were separately interviewed, and they corroborated Stacy's story. They had heard their mother and David arguing in the garage on Friday. Ashley hadn't seen David at all over that weekend, but Bree said that she had looked into the bedroom once and saw that David was asleep on the floor in his underwear.
So that kind of corroborates part of Stacy's story.
Yeah, it does.
Now, the death scene is pretty messy, obviously.
Yeah, terrible.
And it took a lot of examination to put things together. Detective David Spinelli was suspicious of the scene from the beginning, and the more he looked, the more he got bothered. There had been an empty bottle of Ocean Spray light cranberry juice and a bottle of Hiram Walker brandy. David drank whiskey, so these drinks seemed a little too fruity for him. Maybe more like a drink a woman would enjoy.
Yeah, not necessarily, but they do sound more girly than you would think a hard-drinking older guy would drink.
Yeah, and it would be unusual for a guy who was as hard a drinker as David to drink himself to death with an apricot-flavored brandy.
Yeah, right. But, also these sweet drinks could have been better to hide the taste of the antifreeze, so that's a possibility. There had been 2 drinking glasses at the scene. One was half full of antifreeze, and the other had brown stuff in the bottom like cola. The glass with the green liquid was oddly clean, though. No visible fingerprints, no vomit, nothing. So an important part of the investigation was doing background checks on Stacy and David Castor. And this was more than just checking documents and records. It included interviews with friends, relatives, and coworkers. David had never lived further than a half an hour from Syracuse, so he had many friends and acquaintances who had known him for a long time. And everyone agreed that Stacy and David seemed to have a happy marriage. David really seemed to treat her like a princess, and no one had seen them fighting in front of them. Now, David was really a guy's guy in that he liked to ride motorcycles and snowmobiles, and Stacy had enjoyed riding around on the back of them with David. The marriage had started out pretty perfect, but real life had clearly taken its toll by this time.
Yeah, well, like we said, the biggest issue between the two of them was Stacy's daughters. Ashley and Bree just didn't get along with David. When it was just the 3 of them, Mom, Ashley, and Bree, they had been pretty content. Then when Mom married David Castor, they moved to his house, and surprise, he had rules, and he expected them to follow the rules. Stacy thought that the move would be nothing but positive for her and her girls. David had a nice house just a half mile from their school. In the other direction, fast food restaurants and shops. So Stacy envisioned them all becoming a nice, happy family.
Yeah, but it really didn't work that way because David would try and make them follow the rules, and then Stacy would kind of try and get him to let up on them. So they didn't have like a united front as far as raising the girls. That just didn't happen. And David seemed really impatient with Ashley and Bree. Ashley was pretty mouthy, and she would talk back to him. And she said she missed the way that things were before her mom married David. When it was just the three of them, they really had all of their mom's attention, and they did fun things together. David had 3 brothers and 2 sisters. Also, his mom was still alive. He also had an adult son, David Jr., from his marriage to his first wife. So David Jr. had 2 daughters, too, who lost their grandpa when David Sr. died. So a pretty big family there.
Big extended family, all staying or living in the same area.
Right.
So, yeah.
So all of David's relatives seemed much more upset about his death than did Stacy, Ashley, or Bree. And some people thought Stacy seemed more relieved than upset. She said that David had not transitioned well from being a bachelor to being a stepdad to 2 teenaged girls. He really felt like he could lay down the law with them, but they contradicted just about everything he said. So there were many arguments between Ashley and David, and some of these could be pretty nasty.
Yeah, Stacy told the police the story, which was backed up by her longtime friend Danny Coleman. This is where David wanted to take a vacation with just Stacy, but she refused to leave the girls alone. Stacy told Danny that David had a temper, and this was the angriest she had ever seen him. She described him as a monster when he lost his temper. So Stacy had walked out and spent much of her weekend with Danny and her husband at their house.
Yeah, when Stacy told Ashley about David's death, it didn't make any sense to her. Of course, he wasn't her favorite person, and she thought he could be a real jerk. But she never had imagined him as suicidal. He hadn't seemed depressed at all, and Ashley felt really sad and guilty that she hadn't recognized that he was in such emotional pain. So now she feels guilty for her father and her stepfather's deaths. It's a lot on that girl.
Absolutely.
The medical examiner who performed David's autopsy had seen a few cases before of suicide by antifreeze poisoning, but it was still pretty unusual, and it was a terrible way to die. And the pain would really be agonizing as the internal organs shut down from the poison. So David had died of renal failure from drinking ethylene glycol. With no evidence of foul play, the ME determined the manner of death to be suicide, but investigators saw this as a suspicious death. The way David died really looked like extended torture. This was an extended period of dying over days, when he had a loaded shotgun right within his reach.
Right.
Also, the turkey baster was really disturbing. That really pointed to maybe somebody forcing poison down his throat.
You could look at it that way, right?
Yeah. Another odd thing was the 911 call. Phone calls to 911 are almost always made from the location of the emergency, but Stacy had called from her work phone. And Stacy said that David had been depressed, but no one else thought so. No one else had seen that side of him.
Yeah, but think about it. She leaves this guy who's sick, and she knows he's sick, leaves him at home, and goes to work, and then sometime during the workday decides to call 911.
Yeah, it didn't look right.
No, it looks suspicious.
Very suspicious. Well, especially when they find out how her first husband died.
Uh-huh.
But Detective Spinelli went to the medical examiner with his suspicions and also a lot of supporting evidence. Some of it circumstantial, but still significant. So it wasn't enough to change the conclusion to homicide, but the ME did change it to inconclusive. And just making that change allowed Spinelli to have the physical evidence tested at the crime lab, because if it was called a suicide, they wouldn't do that. They don't want to spend the money on that. But inconclusive was enough to get that done, so that was really important.
So what they did, they got fingerprints and palm prints from the death scene. These were all analyzed and compared to family members' prints. Then a blood sample from David was sent to the toxicologist to determine the quantity of antifreeze and alcohol. Now, the tox results showed a very little alcohol or antifreeze level. So this didn't match the scenario Stacy had shared of a weekend-long drinking binge. This meant that David had probably ingested the substances hours before he died. This certainly made sense because the poison had been in his system long enough to put him into kidney failure. So the green liquid and the brown substance from the two glasses were tested. The brown liquid was determined to be some kind of alcohol, drinking alcohol, and cola. The green liquid, big surprise here, contained ethylene glycol. Now this was full strength, it wasn't diluted. The vomit did not contain the poison, so that his body had already metabolized the poison, and by the time he was throwing up, it was too late. The poison had exited his stomach.
Well, Stacy was seen to be pretty emotionless at David's funeral. Then neighbors and friends noticed changes to the house. Ashley trusted her mother, but she thought, gee, Mom just has the worst luck in relationships. But, Stacy's trying to put a good face on things, making some changes in the yard and the house. But the problem is, it really didn't look like David ever had lived there. She was kind of getting rid of all traces of him. So Stacy had David buried beside her first husband, Michael Wallace. And when she died, she had a plot between the two of them. But in the meantime, she was positive and was planning a new life. She's a 2-time widow, but life goes on. She took a job at Legal Aid and made up her mind that she would finally study to be a legal assistant. And Stacy was moving on. But not everyone was ready to put David's death behind them so fast. And that was unfortunate for her, because she was ready to move on, but it wasn't going to happen. David's sister Linda, for example, was super suspicious. David had worked in refrigeration, and he knew all about how painful death from antifreeze poisoning could be. David's ex-wife agreed that David's death just didn't make sense. This was a guy who was full of life. He loved his motorcycles and snowmobiles, and he would have been just fine without Stacy. He's not the kind of guy who would kill himself over a woman, and he had never shown any signs of being depressed, ever. And in addition to all this, the physical evidence was building against Stacy, because the fingerprints on the drinking glass that held the antifreeze all belonged to Stacy. David's fingerprints were not found on either of the glasses or on the antifreeze container. So that does not make sense at all.
Not in the least.
Investigators began to believe that the glass of antifreeze had been nothing more than a prop, really, and that David had actually been poisoned with antifreeze from the turkey baster. They also had phone records that worked against Stacy's version of events. In her interviews with police, Stacy had said that she had called the house several times over that weekend and made many attempts to reach her husband. But when they looked at the records, it showed that she had only called the house once that whole time. Forensic examination of the turkey baster showed that it did have drops of antifreeze in it. Even more damning, David Castor's DNA was found in abundance on and around the tip of the baster. And this DNA was from David's saliva. So this created a probable scenario here. And that was that Stacy was probably administering the poison into David's mouth as he was lying unconscious and sick on the bed.
Yep. It looks that way.
Yes.
So Spinelli went to the DA with the evidence, and the district attorney put his investigators on the case. They needed to do a thorough investigation on David Castor's business associates, friends, and relatives. They had to know if he had enemies, if he was a gambler, or if he had a drug problem. Now, the answer to all three of those was no. So Stacy became the primary suspect. Stacy's mother didn't believe that David had killed himself, nor did she believe that Stacy had killed him. She told everybody who would listen that she thought Ashley was responsible. So she claimed to love her granddaughter. Then in the next breath, she called her a spoiled brat who was capable of murder. So we're rolling over on poor old Ashley here.
Well, the grandma had a lot to play in this, because it seems like the grandmother really made Stacy feel like divorce wasn't an option. So she had her input on that as well. Not that she would encourage the murder, but she might have had some kind of a say in how Stacy would deal with a bad marriage.
Sure.
After David's will was read, the suspicions against Stacy only multiplied. David had left everything to Stacy. His son was left a bracelet, a gold chain, and a restored Dodge. No money, no property. So David Jr. was really hurt by this at first, but eventually he decided that Stacy must have been behind this. The will not only omitted David's son, it just seemed to be all about Stacy and her daughters. Also, it was stamped by a notary public. David Jr. did not believe that his father would make up a new will without an attorney. So another issue was his father's signature. It didn't look like David's signature. David's ex-wife Janice actually got together a collection of David's signatures, and she passed them on to the DA for comparison to the forged signature on the will that had been produced by Stacy. So it wasn't his signature. That was pretty easy to determine.
Yeah, and then because of the similarity of the deaths of Stacy's two husbands, Detective Spinelli suspected that Mike Wallace's death was murder, similar to David Castor's. He got a warrant to record Stacy's phone conversations, and he set up surveillance cameras outside her home. He also set up a camera near the gravesite of the husbands. They had the faint hope that Stacy might confess to the headstones. Yeah, right. And it never happened.
Well, I guess it's happened before, though.
Well, I suppose it did, but...
Not in this case.
No.
No.
The gravesite camera did show Stacy never visited the graves.
Yeah, big deal.
Yeah.
After a review of Mike Wallace's death, significant cause was found to have his body exhumed and autopsied, and the autopsy showed no signs of heart disease. A microscopic examination of his kidney tissue showed crystals that proved an overdose of ethylene glycol. So, aha.
Aha.
Both of Stacy's husbands had died from antifreeze poisoning. So the day after learning of Mike Wallace's autopsy report results, detectives paid a visit to Stacey Castor. She seemed surprised and annoyed that the death was still under investigation. David's death. She thought that they'd moved on, and she was just, why do we have to talk about this anymore, was pretty much her idea. But she did agree to go down to the police station for further questioning, and in a small windowless room, she was questioned for about 3 hours. Stacy was confronted with her lie about calling her house several times in attempts to reach David on the weekend of his death. Then, when she was asked to show the detective which glass she gave David cranberry juice in, she made quite a slip, a Freudian slip, you might say.
Yeah, because she started out saying, well, I poured the antifree, I mean the cranberry juice. Then she pointed to the glass that did not hold the antifreeze. And the detective then asked Stacy why her prints were on the glass that held the antifreeze. But at this point, Stacy's done.
Yeah, this is when she stopped cooperating.
Good for her, although it was a little late.
Yeah, well, as she left, she saw the photo of the turkey baster, and she seemed upset and shocked. Like, what are you doing with that?
Uh-huh.
She wanted them to just leave it alone. Why did they have to push everything? And that seemed to be her attitude about it.
Oh, yeah.
Why can't you just let this go? So when Stacy got home that day, she was all fired up. She called Ashley at college and told her that the police thought she had killed both Mike and David. And she called other friends and family members over the next few days. And police were listening to these conversations because they still had her phones tapped. She was really becoming afraid and felt she needed to actively prove that she was innocent. So her mind was spinning some terrible ideas. Some dark plans.
Very dark. So after Ashley finished her classes for the day, and that was later in the week, Stacy picked her up to bring her home. On the way home, she told Ashley that they had had a tough day. Let's get drunk, she told Ashley. Ashley was kind of nonplussed about this. She'd never drunk alcohol with her mother before. This was really unusual, but it seemed to make sense. They were both upset, and getting drunk might be a nice escape. Well, I don't know about necessarily getting drunk. Maybe you have a drink or two.
Well, she said let's get drunk.
Yeah, so sounds good.
So Stacy bought a 6-pack of watermelon-flavored Smirnoff Ice.
Talk about a girly drink.
And she poured a drink for Stacy as soon as they got home. When Ashley complained of nausea, Stacy told her, well, that's just normal. Then she gave her a pill and said, this will help you sleep it off. The next day was Thursday, and Ashley was a bit hungover, but she was able to get up and go to school. But she only had a morning class that day, and afterwards she went home, where Stacy was waiting for her. And again, Stacy was encouraging her daughter to drink. A camera at a local liquor store showed Stacy buying more booze that morning, and Stacy served Ashley drinks. It was vodka and orange juice in a large cup, but Ashley saw stuff swirling in the drink. Stacy just told her, "Oh, I added some spices, don't be a baby." But it did taste bad. So Stacy showed Ashley a trick. She put a straw all the way to the back of her throat and told her to just suck it down on a count of 10. So she was basically just swallowing this stuff, so she wouldn't taste it much. And the next thing Ashley would remember was feeling kind of sick and going to bed. Now, it was interesting that Ashley's boyfriend stopped by that night, and what he did was he called the house from his cell phone as he stood out front. Stacy answered and told him that Ashley was sleeping and just couldn't be disturbed. So without telling Stacy that he was out front, he asked her if she would look in Ashley's room because he thought he had left his ATM card there. Stacy agreed, put down the phone, and a few minutes later she returned to the phone and told the boyfriend that she had thoroughly searched Ashley's room but had not found his card. But the thing is, he knew she was lying because he was out front and Ashley's bedroom light had not come on at all. So nobody had gone in and searched that room.
Gotcha.
But he didn't say anything. I mean, this is his girlfriend's mother. He's not going to start an argument. He just went home.
Yep. So the next morning, September 14th, 2007, Bree found Ashley glassy-eyed and unresponsive in her bed. She started screaming, and then Stacy came running out of her room. Ashley was obviously in distress and not breathing normally. Stacy called 911. Stacy told the operator that her daughter had taken an unknown quantity of Ambien and had drunk a whole bottle of vodka.
Well, Bree was so freaked out by this she had to leave the room. And when she came back in, her mother was still on the phone with 911, but there was a folded piece of paper that hadn't been there before, lying near Ashley's head on the bed. So Bree picked it up and opened it, and Stacy told the operator that Ashley had left a note. So as the ambulance was racing to the house, the dispatcher kept Stacy on the phone. And at one point, she overheard Stacy expressing worry that the room was such a mess. So that was weird.
Well, we got to set priorities, right?
Right. So Ashley was rushed to the hospital where she received emergency treatment, and she did recover. Doctors said that she was within hours of death and that her sister had saved her life. The note found on Ashley's bed appeared to be Ashley's murder confession, where she admitted to killing her father and her stepfather. Ashley had a life-threatening level of alcohol and opiates in her bloodstream as well. So when Ashley woke up, police detectives questioned her about the murders and about the note. She said that the last thing she remembered was her mother giving her alcoholic drinks. And she denied killing anyone or writing the note or being suicidal. She was just totally confused about this. And it was really suspicious because the note was written with a typewriter.
Then outside of Ashley's hospital room, Stacy and Bree were told that Ashley would survive. Now, Bree would remember that her mother was desperate to get back into the room with Ashley.
Yeah, and I mean desperate. Like she wanted to get in there. She was worried.
Yeah.
And not about her daughter.
Good reason.
Yeah.
As she spoke with the police, Ashley quickly realized that it was her own mother who was setting her up, framing her for murder, and then to kill her. She was a little shocked, and that's probably an understatement.
A big understatement. I mean, this was a lot to take in.
No kidding. You're recovering from this near-death experience, and you find out that your mom's setting you up for killing two guys.
And trying to kill you.
Kill yourself?
Yeah.
Yikes.
And she remembered that her mom had told her that the police were closing in on her, and her mom was worried about being arrested. So she'd just chosen to throw her daughter under the bus.
Yeah.
So this made Ashley realize that her mother probably had killed her father and David Castor. There was no other explanation. So as the police talked to Stacy, asking her about the note found in her daughter's bed and about the deaths of her husbands, she became angry and uncooperative. The police had planned on arresting Stacy, but they held off in order to gather more evidence. But now that more lives were in danger from her, they decided they couldn't wait any longer. I mean, there was a serious chance that Stacy would try and kill her daughter again if she wasn't locked up.
Yeah.
So the next day, Friday, September 15th, Stacy was arrested. She was booked for the murder of David Castor and the attempted murder of Ashley. So Stacy did not confess to any crimes. She held that she was innocent. She hadn't written the note, and she hadn't killed or attempted to kill anyone. Stacy was very willing to blame her daughter for the murders of her husbands, even though, remember, Ashley was only 11 years old when her father died. So the evidence, including the motive, pointed directly to Stacy. After searching Stacy and Ashley's house and computers, portions of Ashley's suicide letter were found on the family PC. The hard drive showed that it had been written in segments over a period of time. 2 rough drafts had been saved. Investigators noticed that the letter referred to antifreeze as anti-free, leaving off the ZE at the end. Now, it could have been a typo, but Stacy had been heard calling antifreeze anti-free before. Detective Spinelli remembered Stacy making that error verbally in an interview after David had died.
So the note had been opened at 2:27 p.m. on September 12th, 2 days before Ashley went to the hospital. And there was proof that Ashley wasn't home at the time because she was attending classes that afternoon. So Stacy was home at the time, and she's the one who had picked up Ashley at school at 3:30 that day.
Right, so Stacy was at home alone, and that document was opened on the family computer an hour before she went to pick up Ashley at school.
Uh-huh.
Ashley's boyfriend was interviewed, and he told police that Stacy had only spoken with him Ashley's boyfriend was interviewed, and he told police that Ashley had only spoken with him about suicide once, and that was about a month ago, when they had both agreed that they would never do that. He didn't believe that Ashley was depressed or that she would have attempted suicide, and he definitely didn't think that she had murdered anyone. She was actually quite excited about starting college, and she and her boyfriend were in a good place in their relationship at that time. Stacy pled not guilty and was held without bail. Her defense team, Charles Keller and Todd Smith, planned to point the finger at Ashley and convince the jury that Ashley had been capable of killing her father when she was just 11 years old.
In December of 2007, Stacy was indicted for the second-degree murder of David Castor, the attempted murder of Ashley, and first-degree offering a false instrument for filing. It turned out that Stacy had convinced a friend of hers to notarize the forged will after David was already deceased. Friend apparently had felt sorry for Stacy because she's now lost 2 husbands, so she ended up doing it against her better judgment to help her friend out. So she agreed to testify, and they decided not to bring any charges against her.
So Stacy stayed in jail over Christmas, and her mother visited her quite a bit. Now she was convinced that Stacy was innocent, and her theory was that Ashley had hated her father for favoring Bree, and that Ashley had hated David for taking away her mother's attention. So according to her, this girl had killed both of them.
After being in jail for nearly a year and a half, Stacey Castor went to trial in January 2009. Now, the defense's version of events, in which Ashley is the guilty party, seemed possible at first, but the evidence slowly convinced the jury of Stacey Castor's guilt. An expert for the state testified that the actual drinking of the antifreeze was probably not that bad. It does have a sweet taste. It's not unpalatable. Now, because liquor is actually the antidote to counteract ethylene glycol poisoning, David Castor's drinking slowed down the poison's effect. So the mixing of the 2 substances, the alcohol and the ethylene glycol, just lengthened his painful death.
Yeah, so kind of like torturing him if you think about it.
Yeah.
One of the first responders to the scene of Ashley's poisoning was Detective Valerie Brogan, and she testified to the chaotic scene and how close to death Ashley actually appeared to be. The jury was not allowed to go to the house in person, so a slideshow was played showing photos of the Castor house and of Ashley's bedroom. More than one person on the scene and at the hospital with Ashley afterwards testified that her behavior and answers were really consistent with her telling the truth. Stacy, on the other hand, was seen as being difficult and very evasive. The emergency room physician who worked on Ashley when she was brought in by ambulance testified that she was conscious, though barely, but definitely incoherent. Her blood alcohol level was 0.14%. And remember, the legal limit for drunk driving is 0.08, so this was nearly twice that. The physician testified that this was potentially fatal, and when the pills she had ingested were added into this equation, she could have likely died if she hadn't been brought into the ER.
Then when the computer expert testified, he said that not only was the suicide note written in portions over time when Stacy was home, the note had been written in Stacy's user account. Also, Microsoft Word, program used to write the note, wasn't even installed on Ashley's computer. Uh-oh.
Yeah, so the evidence against Stacy is just becoming overwhelming. So she took the stand, I guess in a last-ditch effort to convince the jury of her innocence. But that didn't work. On February 5th of 2009, she was found guilty of second-degree murder for David Castor and attempted second-degree murder for her daughter Ashley. Before she was sentenced, the DA asked the judge to impose the maximum consecutive sentences because of the painful, prolonged death of David Castor and the cold and calculating way she attempted to kill and set up her own daughter. As Ashley was in her bedroom comatose from the drugs and alcohol that Stacy had given her, Stacy was out partying in a tent in her yard with friends, acting as if everything was fine. So that showed her to be very cold. So the DA said that Stacey Castor really placed no value on human life other than her own, and that included the lives of her own children.
Yeah, so the judge told Castor that he had never seen a parent attempt to murder her child in order to set that child up for a crime that the parent had committed. It is a strange case, isn't it?
It is. I'm trying to think if I've heard of any cases like that, and I don't think I have.
So the judge sentenced Stacy to 25 years to life for David Castor's murder and another 25 years for attempting to kill Ashley. And then she got another 1 to 4 years for the forging of David's will. She's held in Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women in Bedford Hills, New York. Her earliest possible release date was June 2055.
So forensic psychiatrist James Knoll was interviewed for a 2020 episode on Stacey Castor back in 2009. And he said that she wasn't technically a serial killer, but it was likely that she would have killed again. He described her as a Black Widow type of killer, someone who kills lovers or husbands for financial gain. And she had demonstrated psychopathic traits, especially in her willingness to kill her own daughter and have her daughter take the blame for her other crimes as well.
Right. Now, shortly after Stacy's conviction, David's family made plans to have his remains relocated. They just weren't happy with his gravesite being right next to Stacy's, with her first husband. They looked at it as a way of Stacy gloating and maintaining a trophy of what she had done to him.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the case, but I can see where they're coming from for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, even nothing else, you'd say, I don't want my son or my father, whatever, to be buried next to her.
Well, sure. So in 2011, David Castor's son David Jr. and his mother Janice filed a civil suit, and they were awarded what remained of David Castor's estate. Stacey Castor died in 2016. She was found dead in her cell. Her cause of death was determined to be from a heart attack, and there was no evidence of a suicide or a homicide. So that's kind of funny, not funny haha, but funny strange that she ended up dying.
It is.
At a fairly young age of a heart attack.
Yeah.
So the sources we used for this case, in addition to the 2009-2020 episode Black Widow, there's a Forensic Files episode titled Freeze Framed. And Season 2, Episode 3 of the series Sex, Lies, and Murder covered this case, and this included a really interesting interview with the DA. And the DA suggested that Castor may have killed her own father back in 2002. Her father, Jerry Daniels, died that February after he was hospitalized for a lung infection. And Mike Wallace's family believed that Stacey Castor poisoned her father when she brought him an open can of soda in the hospital. And she was the executor of his estate and benefited financially after he died. Much of the information for this episode also came from the book Mommy Deadliest, written by Michael Benson. Before we move on to feedback, I'd just like to remind you that we have a contest going on now for the best beer review. To enter, you just need to send us a recording of yourself reviewing a beer. Maybe from the area where you live, but it doesn't have to be. You can do this by using your recording app on your phone and pasting it into an email and sending that to us at truecrimebrewery@tiegrabber.com, or by using the Send Us a Voicemail tab on our website, tiegrabber.com. Honestly, we haven't received a lot of entries yet, so if you send one in, your odds of winning are pretty damn good. The prize for the first place is a pair of Jaybird wireless Bluetooth waterproof earbuds. These are amazing. You'll never have to stop listening to your podcasts or your music. You can wear them in the shower. So how wonderful is that? And this is a prize worth $179, so pretty good. Pretty good. If you're interested in getting some more TCB episodes and supporting the show, please consider signing up as a Team Tie Grabber member on our website. Our commercial-free, members-only episodes come out every month, plus there's a big backlog of episodes that are yours to binge as soon as you become a member. You can become a Tie Grabber member for as little as $4 a month, and also when you join, you have your choice of a Welcome to the Brewery gift, which we'll send to you with a nice handwritten thank you note. Also some miscellaneous swag. So just go to tiegrabber.com and click on subscribe to learn more about that. If you have a case suggestion or comments about a crime or even a beer, we encourage you to send us a voicemail. Like I said, we have a widget on our website on the right side of our screen that you can click on and record your message. Another way to send us a voicemail is using your recording app on your phone. Also, if you're too shy for either of those, just send us an email with your comments or suggestions to truecrimebrewery@tiegrabber.com. We really do love to hear from our listeners, don't we?
We absolutely do.
Also, if you signed up for our newsletter, we did put out our first one in January, and we're going to send out our next one in April. So one reason that I started the newsletter is to allow our listeners to participate and have more of a say in things. So I'm inviting you to submit any short articles, reviews of true crime books you've read, or true crime movies or documentaries you've watched. Maybe there's a crime that's affected your life, or has really just kind of changed the way that you see things. Or maybe a true crime book has changed your opinion about a crime or a criminal. We'd love to read whatever you share, and we're going to share a lot of it with all of our listeners in our newsletters. So I'm done with selling ourselves for now. Why don't we go into our listener feedback?
Okay, we got 3 suggestions from people. Got a voicemail and a couple emails. So the voicemail that we'll do first comes from Kara, and she has a case suggestion.
Hi, Dick and Jill. I'm calling from Tecumseh, Michigan. My name is Kara, and I'm hoping that you guys might look into the case of Betty Newmar, also known as the Black Widow Grandma. I was actually married to her grandson. She apparently killed 5 of her husbands in suspicious circumstances and was arrested very late in life, but died before she could go to trial. I would just love you guys to look into that to see if any more information can come to light about her than what we already know as a family. I would love you guys to cover her story. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Kara. I think we'd be happy to look into that.
Well, it's an interesting one. My brief foray into her history. She was married 5 times. All of her husbands died in a mysterious fashion. I think 3 or 4 of them by gunshot wounds.
Wow. Serious.
Yeah. And one that was considered a natural death. She was charged with the murder of her 4th husband, but she died before she went to trial. So nothing really happened with that.
Yeah, so she really got away with this all her life, pretty much.
She did. And as far as I know, once she died, there wasn't any other investigation on the other husbands who had died.
Because she was dead.
Because she was dead.
Gee, I think I still would want to know if those are my relatives.
Well, if they could, yeah.
Yeah, but I guess a lot of time had passed.
But an interesting case.
So we think the motive here was money? Did she get money, do we know?
Money, and just that she liked doing it.
Liked doing it?
Yeah, no, seriously.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, brutal. And she probably wanted them out of her hair as well.
Well, husbands are a pain in the ass.
They're a
aren't
lot
they?
of work. They could be a lot of work. Sure. Okay, so we have an email next from Deborah. And Deborah says she's completely addicted to TCB. So that's great, Deborah. I'm always glad to hear about that addiction. That's a safe one. So she had gotten a subscription to TCB for Christmas. I think that's great. And she wants to tell us about the story of Erin Caffery. Erin Caffery was the Texas teen that wanted her family killed. The father survived, and this case blew me away. If you have covered this story, I haven't found it. Peace, love, and many blessings. So thanks, Deborah. What do we know about Erin Caffery?
Well, we've had other stories similar to this. She was a Texas teenager. Didn't get along with her family because she's a teenager.
Yeah.
Or maybe other reasons. But she managed to convince her boyfriend and a friend of the boyfriend to murder her family, which they proceeded to do. Her mother was killed. Her two brothers were killed. Her father survived.
Wow. So, yeah, we've heard several cases about where a girl tries to get her boyfriend to kill her mother or her parents. But the whole family, that's quite rare. I mean, what did the brothers do?
Well, I'm not sure the brothers being killed was anything other than kind of collateral damage that they could identify the killers.
But that would be
parents.
foreseen that they would be there, I would imagine. Although,
well, you should be able to figure that out.
These are
right?
idiots, yeah. Okay, so she sounds terrible. But let's look into that.
We will.
Okay. We have one more email, Dick.
One more, and this is from Stuart. Stuart says, "Hi, I'm a new subscriber. Greatly enjoying your podcast as I go out running to keep fit. If you would like to do an episode outside North America, there was an interesting double murder here in Northern Ireland a few years ago. The story was eventually made into an award-winning UK television series. The case involved a dentist and his lover killing their respective partners and trying to make their deaths look like a double suicide. The dentist subsequently used his insurance payout on a get-rich-quick scheme, and he lost a lot. Eventually, the truth emerged, and both parties were jailed, but not before the dentist had met and married an American woman.
Wow, that's a twisted tale.
So he didn't even marry the lover that
Yeah.
he had schemed with.
Yeah, well, by then she was old news too, I guess.
Yeah, I guess the bloom was off.
Well, maybe when, he learned that she wanted her husband dead, maybe he decided he didn't want to marry someone like that.
Possibly. So the Wikipedia entry on this case is a bit incoherent, but the local newspaper published a good summary, and Stuart leaves a link.
Great.
Or just search on Colin Howell. Anyway, thanks for the podcast. Keep up the good work.
Right, so Colin Howell and his lover, Hazel Buchanan, killed their spouses, trying to make it look like a double suicide. And like he said, the relationship fizzled, and Howell married an American woman. But his conscience must have bothered him because he confessed to his wife, and she agreed not to tell on him. But he also confessed to elders in his church, and they urged him to go to the police. So this is quite an interesting story. I would like to look more into this. And we haven't done one in the UK for a while.
No, we haven't. And we've got some good sources, so let's do it.
Okay, thanks, Stuart.
Thank you, Stuart.
Yeah. Thanks to everyone for your comments and your case suggestions and just for listening. I mean, we really appreciate that.
More than you can ever know.
Okay. So we're going to sit here and sip some more Pumptoberfest. I love the name. Sounds a little sexual.
Get your mind out of the gutter, lady. Come on.
Okay. Well, you know what? We'll see you next time at the quiet end.
We'll be here. See ya.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.